Hello and welcome to the Created Economy. It's a weekly interview series where we chat with the players from the creator economy at large and discuss the key topics impacting the growth of the industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ken Yeung, and I'm joined by my good friend, Greg Narain. You can find new episodes of the show on Wednesdays, both on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. To Greg's dismay, I will actually read out most of them. They will be on Anchor, Spotify, Google, Apple, Castbox, Stitchbox, Anybox, whatever. And if you want to check out for more,
those are not even real things. You just keep making up, like you use like some AI to generate podcasting endpoints.
True, but they're a dime a dozen these days. Podcasting is a new thing. Hey, Greg, how's it going?
What's up?
Hey. And before Greg rudely interrupted my whole shtick here, you can check out more information about the show at createdeconomy.com. That's where you'll find more information about recaps, lists of upcoming and future guests, and if you want to be a guest on the show, there's also a form for you to fill out that Greg will dutifully fill. Checks and reviews once in a while.
Once per quarter.
That quarter is usually 3 months, but you're really stretching it, dude.
A quarter is anywhere from 3 to 6 months in our universe. we're on VC time.
That's so messed up. without any actual return on investment. And if you like the show, feel free to give us a like and subscribe. Anywhere we're, Created Economy anywhere on social media. Created Economy on Twitter, Created Economy on YouTube. That's where you find all the videos. And also, if you want to check out all the news that we are curating, go to our Flipboard. Woohoo! Flipboard.com/created economy. That's actually where you're going to find a lot of the news, especially from the information where we have, which is actually relevant to our guests today. And without all that housekeeping on the way, let's dive into today's show. Greg, this is somebody you've wanted to talk to for some time. So you actually, what was it, like almost a year and a half ago, you and I started the show, and out of the blue, we've told this story many times, but out of the blue, you just reached out to me. It's like, hey, you want to start to do a podcast about the creator economy? I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I had no idea why you wanted to start a show. I figured it'd be related to the startup, but apparently, you're a longtime subscriber to the information. And apparently this a certain newsletter caught your attention. Is that correct?
That's right. This was my inspiration for even doing this show was actually our guest today. So it's very exciting to be here. And I think, when we started the show, it was originally a news show and then our interviews. We did 2 episodes a week. And, I think in that vein, we saw the news and, Kaya does an amazing job of covering so many parts of the ecosystem. But me being an entrepreneur and a builder, I always felt like there's other points of view to represent. And so we were providing kind of our takes on the news. You can go back and look up those old episodes. We don't do it anymore because it was too much work.
Party of 2, when it says it takes an army to do a podcast or do a show, that literally it is. But yeah, so we're happy to welcome journalist Kaya Yurieff to the show. She's the creator economy reporter for the tech and business publication, The Information. Amazing publication. Started, several years ago. Has a stellar reporting crew filled with that publishes so many scoops that I'm envious about as a former reporter. Before that, she covered social media and big tech for CNN Business. Some of the companies she's covered includes OnlyFans, Cameo, Clubhouse, TikTok, startups, and even creators themselves. And if you're, again, as Greg alluded, if you're familiar with the information, you'll know that she authors the Creator Economy newsletter that comes out 4 times a week. If you haven't subscribed, you should totally do that because it's an amazing thing. That's where you get a lot of the great insights into the space. And she's in charge of the Creator Economy database, which again is another helpful resource for anybody involved in the creator economy. So welcome, Kaya. We're eager to talk to you about the state of the creator economy, your newsletter, the impact of Web3, the creator mindset, and much more. How are you?
Good. Thank you for this intro. I'm really blown away, and I had no idea that about the origins of the show at all. So that was a surprise to me, and I really appreciate you guys reading and following my work. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome, welcome. Greg, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I guess let's start with I guess, what made you, from covering business to going to the creator economy? Creator economy is like this amorphous term, right? Like it was, I feel like it suddenly became like super in vogue, right? Like, were you seeking out a role for it, or was it like a role you sort of got put into?
No, I mean, it's definitely been something that I've been personally interested in. I'm almost 30, and so Instagram and Snapchat were really popular when I was in college. And
You said almost.
almost,
Back in my day.
I got a few more months. But I say that just to give the context of kind of when social media launched and how I was using it. But I was, just an Instagram user, and I was watching kind of the influencer industry kind of sprout before our eyes, and no one was really paying attention to it as a legitimate path. Like it almost became like it was a little cringy almost, or it was really unproven. And you saw some of these early influencers like the Fat Jewish, right, create this huge following and then parlay that into a real business with his canned rosé that he co-founded, which then sold to Anheuser-Busch. And I was like, this is crazy. This is a totally kind of new path for people to make money. And obviously YouTube has been sharing ad revenue with creators since 2007, which is crazy, which blows people's mind when you think about that being in 2022 now. So I think for a long time it was percolating, and people, were familiar with the concept. But, even now when I tell people that this is what I cover, they're like, wait, what? That's your entire job, is covering this? And people still ask me, how do people make money doing this? Like there's so much that people still don't understand about this industry. But I think it's matured to a point where now newsrooms are really saying, wow, this is actually a really important area that we need to look at. So it's always been of interest to me. And when I was at CNN, I had this really broad beat, but I would do stories on, YouTuber burnout or kind of the challenges that trans creators were facing on YouTube. So I did quite a bit of those stories. And I think as a reporter, it's great to have a broad beat because then you learn a lot of different things. And it's helped me in my job now to understand, Apple and Facebook's rivalry and how that plays into privacy changes and how that impacts creators. And so I think all of that is a great foundation. But I think at some point, too, you really want to be a specialist in something because that's where you can really break news and become an expert on something. So I kind of went from the generalist route to like the hyper niche creator economy route.
Well, I mean, I would say, in my opinion, you all made this a space in a lot of ways, right? I think there's like two formidable, forming things. I think like the original signifier research, which became cited widely and broadly by everybody. And then I think you all covering this space really stood it up. I think like for us, like I've been in creator economy for a very long time also, but it wasn't until I started seeing it covered like the way the information covers it that it felt like, okay, it's like actually a thing. Right.
Mhm.
And I think those two resources, like, sort of bookended a ton of like financial and venture activity as well.
Yeah, totally. And I have to give a shout out too to I don't do it all alone. I have an amazing editor, Laura Mondaro, who is behind the scenes and makes the newsletter shine. And we also expanded our team with Mahira Dayal too. So we split up newsletter duties and database duties, which is really helpful because
Yeah.
it's almost like I'm a little bit of a creator myself with kind of filling this out. And so I have a lot of empathy for kind of all the things you have to do and having deadlines and having readers and subscribers who are
Right.
relying on you for information. So it's been awesome to be able to have more resources too internally.
Yeah, it's fascinating that like what you just talked about and what Greg's talking about is, I totally agree. Like I think the something that you mentioned as how this creator economy kind of really started out as like, oh, like how do you make money? Is this actually something to take serious? I think, when you look at the, you and I've been in newsrooms and and it's like, okay, let's focus on big tech. Let's focus on, yeah, is Facebook going to be viable? Okay, cool. At some point, a company or an industry has to hit some traction before it actually becomes it gets taken seriously. Like crypto is at that point where, okay, now we're taking it seriously. Let's dedicate somebody to that space. But at its infancy, people were like, oh, it's just a small thing. Let's bundle it in as with our business beat, and it's going to be a fad, right? It's same thing with oh, ephemeral videos. Like, why is that actually a thing? It's not really a feature. It's not really an industry. It's a feature, whatever. But now you're right. It's like with what you're doing, along with a bunch of these amazing reporters in the space, your peers like Taylor Lorenz from Washington Post, Amanda Silbering from TechCrunch, who we had on the show weeks ago, and others are really showing that it's not just these people who are creating on YouTube, creating these videos on YouTube, and like, wait, how are they worth like $1 million, or how are they like, why are they selling merchandise? What is this? Like, you're actually casting a spotlight on how this is actually becoming a transformative industry, and highlighting the good and the bad, right? You're talking about, yeah, it's good, it's you're freelancer, how do you make it into a business? But you're highlighting also the bad, how the community is treating those that are underrepresented, right? How Black creators are feeling like their dancing, their dance videos are getting appropriated, right? And the impact on LGBTQ creators and so on and so forth. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
So I guess on that point though, now, Kaya, where are we now, right? It felt like creator economy flew, like it was flying, it was taking off. And there's a couple of things. You had a recent article, for example, about sort of how founders, there was like this disconnect between what founders thought in their head and where things were going, and what creators are actually asking for, expecting, right? And I think the article was about Web3, but I actually think it's a bigger thing. Like, I think it seems like even a bigger disconnect. Like, not enough founders were creators to sort of understand, or they're too optimistic. What's the state of the creator economy today, I guess, relative to the heyday that feels like maybe 6 months or a year ago?
Yeah, so I think too, a lot of people, they're separate but intertwined, where you can look at the startup side and then you look at like the actual creators and their businesses, because those are two different things. I mean, sometimes
Yes.
they're overlapping, and sometimes creators become founders and launch startups. But I think what we saw over the past year-ish, I started the newsletter in April 2021, and that was like frenzy. I mean, every single VC needed to have a creator economy play and needed to have a creator economy startup in their portfolio. I mean, the amount of founders, overwhelmed founders I was talking to, who were like, I was not trying to raise, and I literally had 100 VCs in my inbox. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll raise. Like, and I think people too saw this gold rush and this opportunity. And we had all these articles about the Great Resignation and how, journalists are going and doing Substacks, and this is the future of media. And like, we had this moment. And, a lot of this has been happening for a long time with people leaving jobs and pursuing this. But I think the pandemic and the rise of TikTok too really kind of changed the game and accelerated things. So then you had the VCs be like, oh, wow, this is a big opportunity. And then at some point last year, Web3 and creator kind of became one thing, where investors were super excited about that. And I think what's interesting is, like, on the surface, like, there is a lot of potential synergies, to use a jargony word, but there is this independent spirit of creators, and the promise of Web3 is decentralization and new monetization and better ownership, and all that stuff makes sense on the surface. But I think where the disconnect is I talk to creators weekly. We spotlight creators almost every week in the newsletter. And I ask a lot of creators kind of the same set of questions. And especially last year, I was asking a lot of them about NFTs and Web3. And most of the time, it would be met with like a long pause of just like, oh, like half the camp was like, I'm trying to understand it. I know a lot of people are talking about it. Maybe I should get into it. And then other people were like, no, this is not something I understand. It's not something I feel comfortable selling my audience. then you had things like the huge lawsuit against Kim Kardashian and all these celebrities for crypto scams. And I think a lot of creators were spooked by that. And then two, I mean, the technology is just really still in the infancy. I mean, I don't have an NFT, but I've heard from investors too who are savvy or tech savvy people. Like, it's hard. There's a lot of friction to even buying an NFT, setting up a wallet. There's a lot of, scams and issues. So I think, one creator told me, I was like, are you going to launch an NFT project? And they were like, I'm still trying to figure out if I'm going to do a podcast, let alone an NFT. But I think what's important to remember for creators is they have so much going on. A lot of them are one-person teams. They're trying to post short-form video to every platform. They're trying to maybe start a mailing list or a newsletter. They have all these things that they're doing, and then to try to understand crypto and then sell it to their audience. I mean, they're really worried about, staying genuine. So I think that's a big disconnect where VCs and founders were like, okay, Web3 is the future. This is where we're going. And then for creator and Web3 kind of merged as a category almost in some cases. The amount of pitches I was getting for we're a Web3 metaverse creator NFT platform. And I was like, what is going on here? So I think there was a lot of that hype that a lot of people were trying to kind of ride the coattails of. And then you also saw kind of the traditional creator economy startups also try to add some sort of Web3 offerings also, because they thought maybe that could, attract investors. So I think there is a dissonance. I think also, it's important for founders to actually spend a lot of time talking to creators and understanding their needs and actually what the pain points are. And there are, thoughtful founders who do that. And then other people, I think, have to kind of pivot their business and realize this wasn't a business need for creators. The last point too is a lot of these kind of SaaS services came out, and creators also are like, I can't pay $600 a month for all these different services. I think that also gets crazy where they're like, okay, I'm trying to look for more of a streamlined solution for all these things rather than I'm paying $5 a month for my marketing, and then I have to pay $70 a month for this online course provider, and then I have to do this, and it all adds up to a point where it starts to get unaffordable too.
Do you? So I guess in summary though, do you think the startup side is sort of in decline, but the creator economy itself is still from the creator point of view is still rising, or?
Yeah, I don't know if I think it's tough because we're in this environment now where startup funding across the board is in decline.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing down rounds. We're probably going to see more M&A. We'll probably start to see some shutdowns of companies. I mean, we've obviously seen companies like Cameo slash a lot of their workforce. Substack, the New York Times reported that they had trouble raising a Series C. So I think the startup side is just it's part of just kind of the general issue. But I think, but that's not to say that creators are insulated from the downturn. I mean, I don't know that we've seen a huge scale back in ad budgets yet. Creators actually might be a little more insulated from that because, as advertisers are trying to stretch dollars, they might actually beef up influencer marketing budgets. So it doesn't seem like yet that it's impacted creators in a big way, but I think creators are definitely paying attention to it and thinking okay, if I haven't diversified my business, I really need to do that now because, things are looking uncertain. Yeah. I think the big question too is last year we saw a lot more direct monetization. So even Instagram now has subscriptions, Patreon, all of these companies. But, our consumers, if they have less, they have less kind of disposable income and inflation is high, are they going to be able to still be supporting creators in that way? So those are kind of the big questions I have. I don't think we've seen a huge hit yet, at least from the creators I talk to in terms of, sponsored posts are still the number one way creators make money. And I don't think we've seen a wide scale pullback. But, we'll see.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, related to that, you mentioned that there's this it's a Wild West type of approach for creator startups to the creators themselves, right? And it's okay, let me sign up for let me do Cameo, let me do a Patreon, let me do here's this creator this startup that helps me do marketing, let me this one about doing brand deal. So there's 50 different services that you do. And I think that's kind of the equivalent of the, I guess, early 2000 or late 2010, early 2010s, where within the enterprise, it's bring your own device, bring your own, that, that's how Slack started. It started from the groundswell, and it became so popular. So it's almost, I'm kind of thinking that we're seeing that similar type of transformation within the creator space, within creators themselves. But with all this uncertainty that's going on with, okay, is this, this Web3 startup, like, why do I really need to do that as a creator? Like you said, maybe I just want to do a podcast, or I'm having enough trouble trying to promote this show, right? It's like, after we go off the air, I'm like, okay, I don't really want to do anything. I just want to publish this to Anchor, have that be syndicated. I want to publish this to YouTube and tweet it, and then when I do that, everyone will swarm and say, "Oh my God, this is a great episode." But no, there's a lot more work you have to do. You have, okay, let's create some short form videos. Let's put that on YouTube and Instagram and so on and so forth, and to help with the promotion. So, but it's just dealing with so many different platform services can be daunting. Does that mean that there's still an edge that there's still an advantage that to be had by big tech, by Facebook, YouTube, by Twitch, and maybe even Twitter and Snap to a certain degree, to say, look, we're still around. We're not, even though the recession's around and inflation, we still can support you to a certain degree, as opposed to these other startups, which are dependent on funding from investors.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the big tech always has the advantage because they have the distribution and the eyeballs. So as a creator, if I'm starting on day one, I can't just go make a Patreon because I don't have the fans to direct there, and I don't, it's really hard to do it that way. So I think the platforms are always going to be important to kind of getting started and reaching the most amount of people. But I think where the startups have the advantage is that the incentives are a little bit more aligned. Because I think with platforms, we've seen this, right? With YouTube and Instagram over the years, they change their algorithm. Suddenly they're prioritizing this over that. Your AdSense money halves month over month, or is super inconsistent. And it's really hard to be able to rely on those things, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of stakeholders that social platforms have to please. And I think creators have become more important over the past 2 years, especially. And these platforms have woken up to the fact that creators are driving a lot of the engagement and trends, and it's not enough to just provide a platform for them. They have to provide more incentive, especially with kind of TikTok's rise. But I think with the startups, like, there is an opportunity to think about things differently. I mean, very rarely do I meet with a startup founder who's like, yeah, I'm doing an ad model. Like, no one is doing the advertising model. It's become so toxic. And I think the startups are able to kind of market themselves as like, hey, like, we only make money when you make money, or, we're a whole platform that's about creators. We're not about the advertisers and the average user and what this person wants. So there is a little bit of a tension there. And then too, like, online courses, right? Like, some online courses, their model is they take 10% of the earnings. Some are a SaaS model. And some creators are like, well, wait a second, if I make $1 million from this course and then someone's taking 10%, like, that's not really fair. And then others complain having to pay the monthly cost. So I think it can be a trade-off, and different models work for different people. But yeah, I mean, the platforms are always going to have an advantage just because of their scale, their resources, and their distribution.
Yeah. Speaking of TikTok, we looked at it. For anyone that's been reading the headlines in the past few months, TikTok has certainly blown up and become a popular app, especially from anyone who's on social media, but also for creators. However, it's been the subject of a lot of attacks and criticism by American tech companies, and also politicians and lawmakers and regulators. Just high level, Kaya, any thoughts in terms of the viability of TikTok? Because as you look at, like, Evan Spiegel says that, he wants TikTok should be banned or should be regulated. That's certainly the case from Facebook, not surprising, or Meta, not surprising. YouTube also, considers TikTok a rival. So there's a lot of heat on TikTok. Is that, what's the future of this app? That's become like so popular and has really changed the way we do social media.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's really the first Chinese social app that's become popular outside of Asia. If you look at like WeChat, like everyone lives on WeChat and is using that, but that's not really, it didn't compel US users in the same way unless they have family there. So I think the struggle people have with TikTok, and I remember I did this story at CNN where it was early 2020, I think it was right before the pandemic. And I was talking to parents of teenagers who had gone viral on TikTok and who were just totally overwhelmed. And that was a topic that came up a lot where they were like, wait a second, like, but what is, this is a Chinese company. Is their data secure? There's been a lot of debates for it, but I think what TikTok has been really successful at is the product is so good. So people almost are like, I don't care, because they're so addicted to it. And it's really launched the careers of so many creators in a way that hasn't, been as possible in recent years on platforms that are more crowded. I mean, if you can post your very first TikTok with 0 followers and get 1 million followers overnight. I mean, that does not happen on any other platform. And I think their power is in the algorithm, where it's just so good. I mean, you don't even have to follow anyone on TikTok. Like you don't. It's just a totally different model.
I always tell people TikTok's the happiest place on earth, right? Because like you cannot go in there and not come out happier than when you started. Like it's always just something good.
Yeah, and obviously we saw with the Trump administration, everyone, the creators were freaking out that it was going to be banned, and then obviously Biden came in and that kind of fizzled. But now we're seeing kind of that rhetoric come up again. So it will be interesting to see. I mean, I think TikTok has been really on the defensive and has, said, oh no, our servers aren't there, and we have this huge US team. So it will be interesting to see how things play out. But they've done a really good job with the product.
Something. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
No, I was going to say, I guess, I know you had a recent article as well talking about sort of how easy it is to get to that million. And one of the dichotomies we've sort of, observed and narrated, I guess, through the show was, I think a lot of creators are focused on sort of the audience side, right? And I think one of the challenges with the Web3 side is that it's more of a community-oriented space. And so I think fundamentally it's part of why it's a difficult thing to do, because building a community, launching community, hosting and managing all those things is like 1,000 other pieces to sort of take care of. What are you seeing? Are you seeing any evolution, I guess, right? Because like the direct monetization really is better serviced from actually having a community, right? But a lot of creators I've seen resistance to sort of like diving into that. And then as those numbers start to evolve, right? 1 million is a drop in the bucket, right? Like, it's like, great. It's like, you remember when the lira was like totally inflated and it was like, yeah, you need 1 million lira to buy a cup of coffee. There's sort of like this calculus on like, oh, we have a lot, like 50,000 on YouTube is good, right? But that's like the equivalent of like 1 million on TikTok.
Yeah.
So that audience size is getting harder and harder, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's almost the audience size is less important than the audience engagement. So one person I spoke to for the piece just put it so well. He was like, TikTok has unleashed inflation in the creator economy. And it's so true. I mean, to your point, but there are, sorry, something in my throat. Hopefully you can cut that. So there are
we do zero editing that will require work.
So there are about 40,000 accounts on TikTok that have more than 1 million followers. And I think that's significantly more than on YouTube and Instagram. The numbers are in the article, so I will entice you to go read it, the exact numbers. But so with TikTok, I mean, you're able to reach a lot of people really quickly and amass a following super fast. But then the downside of that is, as I said, you literally never have to follow anyone on TikTok to use the app and have a positive experience on it. So there's some internal data from TikTok in the piece that as of last summer, about 14% on average of creators' video views came from their followers. So that's really, really hard. And of course, people could still see your video without following you. I mean, there's different signals that TikTok takes into account. But that's really tough. If you're trying to build a community and an audience that trusts you, where then you can tell advertisers, hey, like if I recommend this product, it's going to sell and I'm going to convert. That's really hard when the vast majority of people that are seeing your videos may have no context of you and been like, oh, that was funny. Next. Like you're just kind of scrolling through. So we've seen creators be savvy about using TikTok almost as this jumping off point of like, okay, I'm getting a lot of attention, I have my niche, and then I'm quickly trying to move that elsewhere. So it's really less about, and especially now too, if there's 40,000 people with 1 million followers. I mean, that doesn't mean what it used to mean. So, and some people can be that kind of personality and people are drawn to them for that. But we've really seen kind of this rise of niche creators where they're like, I have this passion where I mean, I always use this example of this woman, Marissa, who runs a cheese board Instagram, and she shows people how to make like really cool cheese boards step by step. And she's parlayed that into, workshops, virtual workshops that she does for corporations and for friends. And she has a cookbook, and her whole business is about cheese, right? Like it's not about her personality. And so I think we're going to see more of that. Yes, I think we're going to see, or another one too, the car mom on Instagram. She does reviews of cars that, and she talks about like, can the stroller fit? Like, how big are the cup holders? Not about like the specs of the car, right? So I think like we're going to see as this gets bigger, you have to stand out in a different way. It's not enough to just be like kind of the typical lifestyle influencer. That will work for some people, but it's just getting crowded. So you really have to have kind of those engaged communities and kind of find a niche that makes you stand out.
So one of the things that you've done at the information is kind of spearhead the creation of the creator economy database, right? And it has some pretty fascinating data in there. Can you when was this? So this is as the data that we're looking is as of actually the summer, May 25th, 2022. How often is this database updated, Kaya?
So we do kind of these big quarterly updates. So we'll kind of update on a rolling basis. I'm thinking about your guest list, how often you kind of review that. So we do get submissions. We do add companies too. As companies are raising money, we track kind of funding amounts, which was a lot harder of a job last year because there was a lot more companies that were announcing funding. So, but we do kind of a quarterly update and a takeaway. This year, we've really been focusing on kind of how funding has dropped. So in the second quarter, which is the most recent data we have, and this is focused on, it's a global database, but the funding numbers are US specific. So in the second quarter, funding for creator economy startups in the US dropped 60% from the same period last year, down to less than 700 million. And last year alone in the US, about $5 billion was invested in creator economy startups. Where this kind of came from was conversations with my editor where we were like, like, where are the most creator economy startups located? Like, how many of them are there? Like, how much funding have they raised? And we really weren't able to find that data anywhere. I mean, you have PitchBook and Crunchbase, which are awesome for kind of general startups, but the issue is the creator economy, it's so big, but so niche at the same time, where you don't have the traditional data sources really looking at it. I mean, every once in a while, there's an academic study, but there's no one kind of tracking it closely on a day-to-day basis. So we almost have 300 companies in the database. So these are all private companies. And we've just been kind of updating it, and we do these quarterly updates, and we have data like, investors. We've added some drop-down menus too. So for certain companies, you can see prior rounds too, not just the most recent. And we have are experimenting with more charts at the top and trying to kind of pull more data out of it. For stories and for our readers.
So when you look at the, how much has been invested, you kind of look at this chart here. For those that are listening, we're showing the creator economy database on the information. So tracking from Q2 2021 to Q1 2022, there has been a drop in terms of how much has been invested overall. Is this a sign that you're more into data than obviously we are, but as you look at it, is this because that there's fewer, because of the pending recession, that there's not as many startups that are looking for funding? Like what can we attribute this drop in funding in Q1 2022 towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, part of it a big part of it is just the environment we're in. I mean, across the board, startup funding is declining. I think too, a lot of companies too raised last year, or raised 3 times last year, or twice last year. So they're kind of holding off and are like, okay, this is probably not the best moment for that. And we saw this huge frenzy of companies last year raise. So, even if we were in a different environment, you probably wouldn't see the levels of last year, just because there was so much excitement and kind of capital flowing around. But I think the downturn is a big part of it. We've also, like the Substack example, right? Like they had trouble raising a Series C and they decided not to. Or, we've heard of companies too that are, did smaller rounds, or, who are waiting. So it's a mix of things, but I would attribute it mostly to just the environment we're in.
So this would not, looking at this, like just graph at right now, it's like, it would be wrong to say, oh my God, the creator economy is dead. Like, oh my, there's no more funding. It's over. Let's move on to, cat startups or whatever. Right. We're not, this does not spell disaster, right? It's going to take it's going to take a long-term view.
It doesn't spell disaster. And I think too, when we like Snap, right? Like Snap just did a major restructuring. They hired at a faster pace than nearly every other kind of big tech, publicly traded company. So they're really reorganizing and refocusing. So I think probably similar things are happening at startups right now. I mean, we did a layoff tracker too. I mean, there's been tons of creator economy startups that, they raised a lot of money, they hired a lot of people, they overhired. They're rethinking what their product is. So I think we're in a moment now of kind of recalibration a little bit. And we'll see kind of what happens next.
Now, just for those who are watching or listening, the 2 categories that were leading in this database were creator platforms and creator services. And then crypto is actually number 3, but significantly off from there. I'm kind of curious, I guess, Kaya, how are creators reacting to this change, right? Creators are all very hesitant often to like try new things, right? Because they have a process and they sort of don't want to disrupt it. And I think part of their fear of working with startups also like, are you guys going to be around? Like, do I build my thing? And to some extent, this kind of action or activity is scary to creators. But I think what that means is that creators have to rise to the occasion to do or find solutions still on their own. And this sort of idea of the content entrepreneur, that Joe Pulizzi is like a big advocate for, like this idea that you mentioned, like creators often are single solo person sort of companies, but there's still a lot of responsibilities. Are those 2 like the services category or any of those? Are you seeing any movement in still like in those areas, or creators coming up with new solutions?
Yeah, it's funny because I ask creators too often, what services do you use? How do you run your business? And a lot of it is like G Suite. Like they're like, oh, I just use like Google Sheets, right? Like, so I think, some of them are nervous about the time. Like it's not just about whether the startup's going to be around, which is an important question, but it's like, oh, I have to learn this new software and I have to input all this stuff when I already have a system. I mean, I talked to creators who are like, I keep all my receipts in a literal shoebox. And that's like how I kind of run my business. Or a lot of them too outsource this, right? Like they have a manager, they build a team, and they're actually not in the weeds on, trying to figure out their taxes or hashing out their sponsored deals. So I think there are a lot of intermediaries who kind of figure out how to do that stuff, but especially for smaller creators and people who are starting and don't have maybe the resources yet, or haven't taken the leap to hire a team, they are looking for different solutions. So, it's tough. And I think a lot of creators too, they come into this because they have a passion for something and they're super creative, and some of them they don't want to deal with that kind of back end stuff, and they're overwhelmed with that type of stuff. So I think that's where kind of the managers really can help, and the personal assistants and all that stuff. But I think that's really the big challenge for these creator economy startups. And I thought the same thing last year when times were good, where I'm like, your number one problem is getting creators to actually use the service and know about it. Because there's so many and there's so much competition that, these startups have to do huge outreach to creators, and a lot of it's word of mouth, where if a creator knows their friend is using it and they like it, they'll use it. But too, like the upfront financing space is super interesting, like the Spotters of the world, and a big part of their challenge too is like explaining to creators that this isn't like a scam, right? Like that they actually are going, these are the terms and going through the contracts and all that stuff. So it's tough. And I think creators, because there hasn't been infrastructure for so long, they've had to build their own kind of ragtag solutions to this. And it's hard to shift things around once you have a system.
But to that point, like, let's talk about shopping, for example, right? I mean, shopping on that chart was fairly low in terms of receiving investor funding. And I guess it seems like, doing some sort of like a creator inspired QVC is like, okay, cool. Let's find ways to help creators sell merch direct to consumers. But then you look at, to what you and Greg are talking about is like, oh, is it actually something I want to, as a influencer, is that something I want to invest my time in, knowing that one, that startup could go away, or two, does this actually sound like something viable, or should I just go with, Shopify, or should I go with Instagram, Meta, so on and so forth? But then you look at the headlines, Meta is abandoning its ambitions to do social shopping. So it's like, is this actually something viable? So I wonder, it's like, how does that impact the creators? Because there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt when they look at like, hey, I as a creator want to do something.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ambiguity. It's like, tech, get your shit in order. Like, figure this stuff out. Help me out, because I can't make this bet only for you to break up with me, and like I can't have this long-term relationship with you. Right. So
yeah, I have so many thoughts. So I think with shopping in particular, for some reason, no one has been able to make social shopping work, and people have tried for years. And I think too, everyone looks at, Asia as an example of like, oh my gosh, live shopping. You hear the crazy stats on creators selling enormous amounts of products. And we invented QVC at HSN, right? Like we should be all over this. But I think
I don't know. Those ads work pretty good. I bought so much crap off of like Instagram feeds.
The ads, it's the ads though, right? Like the ads are different than kind of the shopping tabs. But as you mentioned, they are kind of rethinking their shopping. And if you look at a platform like Pinterest, right? Like that should be a no-brainer that people are buying stuff on there, because you're in the mode for inspiration. You're trying to plan your wedding. You're trying to do all this stuff. But for whatever reason, it's stayed as an inspiration place. I mean, it's not this huge shopping, juggernaut. So I think that's part of the problem with commerce, is even the big platforms haven't really been able to figure it out. It's also a really specific skill set. To be able to host a live shopping program, like that's a skill. I mean, if you think of like being a game show host, right? Like that's a really niche skill that not everyone can do. So I think that's also kind of a factor in this. But I think also the savviest creators, like they know this is fleeting. They know that they can't rely on any of these things. So they really take advantage of it while it's there. Like if you think about Snapchat's giving away $1 million a day for that period of time, like there were 8 people that became millionaires and made over $1 million from Spotlight and then never used it again, And so it's like they made the money and they left. So I think to an extent, like creators are willing to try stuff out, but I think, you have to weigh the time investment. Like if you made a Substack and then Substack shuts down, you're like, at least you own your newsletter list there.
Yeah.
But, on other platforms, like you do have to weigh those things. But I think if the money is there, creators are willing to like, okay, let me try this out. I'll make some money and we'll see how it goes. But I think shopping's it has been kind of a unique challenge to make work across.
It's really interesting though, because like, I guess, as like a founder, this is like the antithesis of how like we try to build a company, right? Like, you look for like opportunities, like, but you look for scalable things that will continue to grow. And it's such a different mindset. I think your average creator has like 7 revenue streams, right? And it can go up to 30. And I think that this such a challenging thing, right? There's always been that bias though, right? Like, like where creators don't want to sell things to their fans, right? Because, it's easier to tell an advertiser, hey, sponsor me, and let me like, I'll do the work for you, right? Like, as opposed to like trying to like weave it in and look like you're shilling or any of these other things. And I think that's what the aspiration of all this social shopping stuff was like, could I make it more ancillary? But the problem is, without that endorsement also from the creator, like if they just put the pin, like saying, great, this is the product, but then they don't say it, you know, it's kind of going to miss on like almost on purpose. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's, we're running down on time, I guess. We didn't talk much about Web3. So I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts on there was obviously, you know, the merge in the creator economy in Web3 like earlier. And there's obviously a lot of resistance, but I guess I'm kind of curious what your takes are on, you know, how the big platforms will enter. And do you think that will normalize this for more of the creator economy at large?
So we've seen the beginnings of this, right? So Twitter was kind of the first with the NFT avatars. You know, Meta announced a while back that they were going to start some sort of NFT type thing. They've been rolling it out. I haven't seen it in the wild on my feed personally. I don't know if you guys have.
Oh.
It's almost like they missed the moment a little bit, because obviously startups can roll things out a lot faster than these big platforms. I do think that the platforms have the opportunity. Obviously, they have the distribution and the eyeballs, so it's a way to kind of make it more mainstream. I think when we're in this tech bubble, we're like, oh, everyone knows NFTs, and I do think NFTs had their mainstream moment with the Beeple sale, where, you know, that was like headlines all over with like, wait, digital art. So I think people are generally familiar with the concept now of an NFT. But I think just the technology needs to be more consumer ready. You know, if you look at like e-commerce, like there's still tons of people in America that shop in brick and mortar stores. So like making even the transition to like online shopping, let alone to kind of these more you know, complicated technologies. And I think too, the big thing that I see for creators is like, what is the utility of this? Like, what if I'm selling an NFT or I have a Web3 community, like what is that offering that I don't get from Patreon or the current platforms that work really well? You know, this is kind of a out of left field example, but when I was at CNN, I did a lot on kind of content moderation and those type of issues. And I remember when I was covering Parler, the app that we all know that was eventually, you know, kicked off and came back to app stores, but everyone was like, yeah, Parler, unfiltered, free speech, all this stuff. And then the app was just like so slow. You couldn't post, you couldn't search for people. There was a moment after the insurrection where everyone was going to Gab, and I was trying to make an account so I could monitor what was going on there and cover it. And I couldn't even make an account because the servers were just completely melting down. So just kind of using that as, you know, and shifting back to crypto, like we are so used to these apps working seamlessly. And just, you know, when Facebook goes down, it's like, oh my God, the end of the world. But we don't even realize how much we've relied on just everything being super fast. And like, think about when you're somewhere in the middle of nowhere and your internet is slow and you're like, this is agonizing. That is the experience I think a lot of people have with crypto products. So I think it's just not consumer ready. And I think for creators too, it's like, okay, let's say I do want to do an NFT project. What am I offering besides like this JPEG to people that is valuable to them? Is that merch discounts? Is that, you know, if you're a holder, you get into my Discord server, but like you can already do that with Patreon. So I think that's the disconnect of like, what is the wow factor for creators?
So that we hear a lot of these builders, these founders come on the show, and we read online that it's like, oh, the advantage of Web3 is it lets you, you know, it's decentralized, it lets you own your community, right? It gives control back to the creator instead of, you know, oh, your data is all sucked up by big tech and blah blah blah. The creators that you talk to, because you talk to a bunch of creators as part of your job, and you mentioned it, you alluded to this earlier, that, you know, there's people that are like, I don't really care about Web3. I'm kind of worried about like how I
Yeah.
juggle, you know, promoting my what I do online. Are they is decentralization or that is that at all in their vocabulary right now? Like, do they say, oh yeah, well, you know, I would really love to own my community and, you know, love it to be decentralized. I love to, have it be all on the blockchain. Like, is that something in their taxonomy right now, or is that like, is this mostly just the pundits and the startup people?
It's really not. I mean, there is a slight, like, the thing I hear from creators is like, they want more ownership of their audience, but that doesn't mean it has to be on the blockchain. Like, they do want more control. And I think they've seen these platforms make changes, or their account got mistakenly deleted, or they posted something and they can't get it back. I mean, those are the real fears that they're facing. I think too, like, in theory, it would be great. I mean, Triller, I think, is a really problematic, there's been a lot of problematic reporting on Triller, but they tried to do this thing where they were giving equity to creators. And like, that was really attractive to people, to own a piece of the platform that they're posting on and making popular. And you haven't seen that, right? Like with TikTok. I mean, that would be super interesting if ByteDance offered equity to creators. I mean, we saw this, right, with ride sharing, where some drivers were able to, buy stock. So I think there's some of that where, like, so of course they would like more ownership, but I don't necessarily think that they're thinking of it in terms of like crypto. And that kind of goes back to the same point of, what can that offer me that other traditional routes don't right now?
Yeah. So I guess for my final question, as a reporter, as a journalist that's covering the creator economy, what are some of the stories that surprise you about the industry, and what are some things that you're working on next that you're looking to get input and insight from creators themselves or from entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Surprising. I mean, one story that I did last year is I spent all year last year talking to founders, and so few of them were women. And I thought, and I know that that's that's reflective of the broader startup space, but I was really surprised by that, because so many women are creators, and so many, this whole industry has been built on minorities and underrepresented groups, and Black creators are, often starting a lot of the trends. You mentioned at the beginning dances on TikTok, and not getting credited for that. So I thought there would be more kind of diversity on the startup side. So I did a piece on that last year about just kind of using our database and looking at kind of what percentage of funding goes to women. And it's better than the overall numbers, but it was still really only a sliver. So that was one thing that was kind of surprising to me, is I thought there would be kind of more female founders on the startup side. There are a lot of great, there are many that I've met, but I think overall it's very overwhelmingly male and white. I think too, what we still really have this rosy picture of the creator economy. I think back to like the beginnings of Uber and Lyft, and getting into Ubers and the drivers being like, oh my God, I got this huge bonus to be a driver, and I can set my own hours, and I can stop driving when I want. And then fast forward, we're like, are Uber drivers employees of these companies? Should they be, should they have benefits? And I think we're missing that with the creator economy, where, if you're a YouTuber, you're getting a check from Alphabet for AdSense, right? Like, should they get more support and benefits? I think we just really don't talk about the dark side of this, and how, I have these really, high energy conversations with creators, and then I ask them, do you feel burnt out? And it's like, oh my God, yeah, all the time, and I think like both can be true. They can love their job and love what they do, and they can feel kind of the lack of resources. So I think that's one thing, is like, we haven't had a real labor conversation, I think, about creators, and, especially like child creators. I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms that we can open. But if you think about child actors, like, there's more kind of support in place for that, and not quite the same for child influencers. So I think there's a lot on kind of the challenges that people face, the mental toll of like mean comments and being online all the time. So I think that's the big thing that I'm always kind of talking to creators about. And I see more coverage of it now, but I think we still have this image of like the TikTok collab houses in LA, and just kind of how the wealth that can come from like the top part of creators. But the reality is, this long tail is often struggling to make this a full-time job, and trying to figure out how to grow this into a sustainable business.
Yeah,
So
it's fascinating. It's fascinating to hear the parallel tracks between ride sharing and the creator economy. I actually didn't think about it until now. And as you mentioned, the child influencers, child creators, I started thinking about corn. I don't know. It's a thing. Greg, any? Okay, look.
And I will say too, there are lots of thoughtful parents who are helping their kids navigate this and are, saving their kids money and all this stuff. Like there are tons of thoughtful parents, but I think there's just so little guidelines or guardrails at all in the space. And if you look at, some of the congressional hearings that we've seen with Facebook, like I think senators have gotten a little bit better about understanding social media, but like trying to regulate something that you don't understand and that's a super complicated industry, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah. Greg, any final questions for Kaya?
No, I guess just are there any we always love to look forward and ask people where they think things are going, right? Is there anything standing out now, just trends or opportunities, and maybe for both audiences, right? Like you talk to somebody on both sides. Like, is there a blind spot you think founders should be paying attention to? And is there like anything new or interesting that, creators might want to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I hear from creators a lot is kind of forums for them to connect with each other are really lacking. So like, yes, you could do a Discord server, or you have a few creator friends and you have a group chat and you're sharing tips and asking, oh, hey, do you know, I'm looking for a new manager. Like that, I think could be solved. And I don't see a lot of that kind of in the startup side. That was really evident at VidCon, which is the big kind of flagship creator conference. It was the first time in person in a few years. And especially because so many of these TikTok creators became famous and built followings during the pandemic. I mean, it was less about the fans this year. It was all about the creators seeing each other. I was doing an interview with a creator who had, I think 4 million TikTok followers. And in the middle of the interview, someone ran up to him and goes, oh my God, hi, whatever. And I was like, oh, was that a fan? He goes, no, that's a TikTok creator with 12 million followers. And it was this kind of fun moment that really crystallized for me, like most of the kind of fun events were all the private creator lounges. Like that's where all the creators were excited to hang out. And not that they didn't want to see their fans. And of course they did the meet and greets, but they were super excited to just see each other and connect. And I think there haven't been a lot of solutions kind of for that. And I think another thing too, I mean, it's become this like cliche buzzword, but community is really what it's about. And I think that's an area actually for the big tech platforms that they could really double down on. I think Facebook groups have been such a huge success, but the hip Gen Z creators do not want to be on Facebook or having Facebook groups for their fans. So I think we've seen apps like Geneva pop up or Discord, right, where there's servers and you can connect with kind of top fans. So I think that's another area. And there's other companies like Fan House too, which are offering kind of more private forums for creators to kind of connect with fans. So I think those are two big areas. And Jordan Matter too is a YouTuber who I spoke with, and I thought he had a really kind of thoughtful comment of, also there's not a lot of startups focused on people behind the camera. It's all about kind of the talent, but also just the whole infrastructure. I mean, just like I was saying, I have an editor and our engineering team actually built the database. Like there's so much that kind of goes into this newsletter besides me. And it's the same thing for a big creator. Like they have a manager, they have videographers and editors and photographers and all that stuff. And it can be hard to find those people and for people to kind of be supported in those roles too. So I thought that was a pretty shrewd observation by him to kind of focus more on just broadly the creator economy, not just the people who are the talent.
Is there a sleeper startup that you're watching that we should all be paying attention to? You're like, oh my God, like she's not
going to tell you. There's no way.
Well, I'm pretty sure if she does tell me, she will. Her response will be, "Hey, in order to find out, you're gonna have to check, subscribe to my newsletter."
That's true. You have to subscribe to the information. I mentioned them already, but I think Geneva is an interesting one because it's like where Discord is like dark and gamery, like Geneva is like white and light and like feels more user friendly, at least for me. I know a lot of people like Discord.
It's interesting though. Like it seems like Geneva's starting to get its pull once it went Web3, right? Like, because the company's actually been around for some time, right? Like they've been building for a while, like from what I understand.
Well, I think they're, I don't know off the top of my head. I think they're 2019.
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not super familiar with their Web3 offerings. I'm more kind of focused on like this idea of the rooms and the communities. They have ones that are like for like Black women to share advice and tips and make friends. And like those are kind of the interesting areas. You know, when I think about how we used to use Facebook, like there was no DMing. We would like write all this personal stuff on people's walls. Like we would never do that again. And I think too, these public forums and posting, broadcasting stuff on Instagram for the average user too is like, it's big milestone moments. Like I like will Instagram like a big moment in my life. I'm not like really posting something to my feed. So I think these private kind of safer spaces for people has been really attractive. So I think that's something that they've done well.
Bring back Path. That's what we need to do. Bring back Path. Oh my God. Cool. Well, thank you, Kaya, for joining us. Everyone, go subscribe to the Information's Creator Economy newsletter. It comes out 4 times a week. You can go to theinformation.com/newsletters to sign up, as well as check out other newsletters that they have. But for this show, we're going to care about the Creator Economy one. Everyone else, whatever.
They have a crypto one too. It's once a week.
Crypto. Yeah, we don't talk about crypto. Yeah, so thank you so much. Really appreciated hearing your insights and making Greg's week and making mine. I really enjoyed, always love chatting with journalists and hearing your perspectives, obviously, because you are at the front lines of this industry. You're observing, you're analyzing, and giving us a sneak peek behind the scenes. So really appreciate it, and looking forward to reading more from you on the Information. So thank you so much, Kaya.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. It's been great.
All right, Greg, cool. And that wraps up another episode of the Created Economy. Oh my God. Our name is such a tongue twister. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We will be back for more episodes of the Created Economy. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next time. Have a great day.